Welcome to Washington Talk. I'm Eun Jang-cho. The Trump administration laid down the markers for North Korea to meet, while stressing the U.S. is willing to reciprocate and fundamentally transform the bilateral relationship. Meanwhile, top intelligence chiefs told Congress that North Korea is unlikely to give up its nuclear weapons. We find out what all these mean for the second summit.
We will get that at some point through a comprehensive declaration. We must reach agreement on expert access and monitoring mechanisms of key sites, international standards.
Kim Jong-un.
Because its leaders ultimately view nuclear weapons as critical to regime survival.
The meetings with North Korea, the date the executive meeting, the end of February.
In the studio with me today, Ambassador Thomas Hubbard, the chairman of the Korea Society and senior director of the McLarty Associates. He served as U.S. ambassador to the Republic of Korea from 2001 to 2004. Also joining me today, Mr. Scott Snyder, director of U.S.-Korea Policy Program at the Council on Foreign Relations. His latest book, South Korea at the Crossroads, charts the evolution of South Korean foreign policy and strategic choices. Welcome to the program.
Good to be here.
Thank you. Good to be here.
Now, Ambassador, Special Representative Beacon, in his speech this week, disclosed for the first time that Chairman Kim had promised to Secretary Pompeo to dismantle the plutonium and uranium facilities. And why do you think he reminded this commitment at this time, right before the working level talks?
Well, one, I think he wanted to make it public in the United States that we had indeed been asking for the full abandonment of North Korea's nuclear weapons programs, and we realize that includes programs based both on plutonium and on uranium. The North Koreans have said less about that in their own statements. So I think it's important that Chairman Kim said it to him, and it's important that he made it public so that the North Koreans know that the American people will be expecting that too.
And why is uranium being in there very important?
Well, because the first program we addressed, and in many of our agreements, we directly addressed the plutonium part of the program in Yongbyon. And so there's been less said about the uranium side of it, and it's important to get that directly onto the agenda.
Mm-hmm. And Mr. Snyder, Special Representative Beacon and also Secretary Pompeo stressed the simultaneous and parallel actions by the two sides. Why do you think the U.S. is stressing this point at this time?
Well, the critical thing about simultaneous and parallel is that it is designed to address the North Korean desire to approach the Singapore statement in a sequential fashion, starting with normalization of relations between the U.S. and DPRK and the establishment of peace, and then doing complete denuclearization. But I think the proper way to move forward based on the statement is actually to simultaneously pursue all of those objectives, so that you can link up complete denuclearization with the objectives of peace and normalization of relations.
Mm-hmm. So simultaneous actions on these four pillars of the Singapore Agreement, would that reinforce each other's, would that reinforce the steps together?
Yeah, I think it does. And in a way, it's a statement by the United States that we would like to address all of these issues and go forward on that basis. In another way, the North Koreans have always wanted some kind of step-by-step, simultaneous action-reaction. And I think that is a bit of a concession to the North Koreans that we'd like to go. And we're no longer saying, you destroy your entire nuclear weapons programs, and only after that will address all of these other things. It introduces a step-by-step sequential element that has not always been part of the U.S. approach.
Did you also read the flexibility?
I think that flexibility is part of what Special Representative Began has been signaling, but I also saw firmness in his speech, and namely with regard to a reaffirmation that the ultimate objective is complete denuclearization and that a final fully verified denuclearization process will include stopping production, dismantling and removal of both missile and nuclear facilities.
So there's this flexibility and firmness at the same time. How should North Korea respond and come up with new denuclearization steps?
Well, we hope they begin to take some concrete steps that are verifiable. And what we've had since Singapore is a lot of sort of promises, a lot of words indicating a willingness to denuclearize the entire Korean Peninsula. But we haven't yet seen many concrete steps, so I think it's time for that.
And reportedly, United States and North Korea will first focus on dismantling Yongbyon nuclear facility. And North Korea has been adamant that U.S. first take reciprocal actions first. So if North Korea has decided to take actions on Yongbyon at this point, what do you think has prompted North Korea to change its calculations?
Well, I don't know yet whether we see much of a change in calculation. I think that what we see is the North Koreans offering Yongbyon as a starting point rather than offering a declaration as a starting point. And then the big question from the Pyongyang summit is, well, what would the U.S. do in return? What are the corresponding measures? And so that is really about what specifically will the U.S. put on the table that would correspond with the steps that the North Koreans have indicated they would be willing to take with regard to Yongbyon. And then also Special Representative Began essentially indicated that Yongbyon is a first step. There's an expectation that North Korea eventually will do and more, addressing the fact that Yongbyon is not the only place where North Korea is engaged in nuclear development.
Mm-hmm. And Special Representative Began said the working level talks will chart out future roadmap of negotiations and declarations. And that sounds to me like a partial and incremental declarations adding up to a comprehensive declaration. Is this a good approach to receive declaration from North Korea?
Well, I think what I see happening and read from Began's speech is one, we're not going to insist on a declaration as the first step on that process. It will come somewhere along the way after a number of discussions. I think the agreement to begin having working level talks is very important. There's been very little organized negotiation on what actually will be in the agreement as we move along the process. So I think it's very significant that Began now has a counterpart in North Korea, and that they will sit down and do organized negotiations.
Just to add, though, on that I think that Began's speech also indicated that we're really at the beginning of a process, and there is a lot of work to be done. And, the main failing of the Singapore summit was that we failed to marry symmetry with the process. And here we are weeks in advance of the next summit, and Began is there trying to negotiate and agree with the North Koreans on the process that is going to be necessary and really should be one of the major deliverables from a second summit. It's the process that we should have gotten after the first summit that is absolutely essential to get as a product of the second summit.
And intelligence chiefs this week said that North Korea is not likely to give up its nuclear weapons. And Special Representative Began said intelligence analysis divorced of policy is incomplete picture. What is your take?
Well, I think my own view on this and what I think he's trying to say, I think every expert agrees that it will be very difficult to somehow persuade North Korea to give up its nuclear weapons program. As the intelligence, the chief of national intelligence says, this regime sees its nuclear weapons program as key to its survival, and it will not give it up easily. On the other hand, I think as one of you mentioned at the beginning, this negotiation, this first step into a real negotiation, is starting out on a positive note, and the North Korean leader has given us some material to have a positive attitude, including the statement that they're prepared in the right circumstances to give up both plutonium and uranium enrichment programs. But it has to be worked through.
And Scott, some critics point out that for the past 25 years, intelligence analysis has always been North Korea will not give up its nuclear weapons. So what is your take?
Well, we've had that assessment for a long time, and I think that Special Representative Began was really correct when he indicated that that is the trajectory that North Korea is on. He did not dispute the facts on which the assessment was based. He simply said that the objective of policy is to try to change the trajectory of U.S. policy in order to induce a change in the direct trajectory of North Korean policy. And frankly, that's the only way that it's going to be possible for us to see any new results as the U.S. and North Korea try to grapple with this issue.
We have in the past often said, as I indicated earlier, give up all of your nuclear weapons programs in a full and verifiable way, and then we'll talk to you. Now we've kind of reversed that, particularly I think with the top leaders involved, where we're now saying, we recognize that you have a program. We're not going to insist that you disclose all of it right now. We've heard what you've said about your willingness under the right circumstances to give it up. Let's start talking and see how we can get to a point where you're prepared to do that. I think that's the right approach.
Mm-hmm. And President Trump said early next week the location and the date for the second summit will be announced, and he's been expressing a lot of positive messages about North Korea. Do you think this has helped keep diplomacy with North Korea afloat?
Well, this is President Trump's unique style, and sometimes it feels like he's going a little bit too far when he talks about his love affair with Kim Jong-un. But I think that we have to recognize that the innovation that President Trump has brought to this process is the leader-led process. And certainly the exchange of letters is a major component of it. It makes the job of analysts like me a lot more difficult because we don't know necessarily what is in those letters. But also the critical thing is that it's not just going to take letters. The two governments themselves have to start to work with each other if we want to see this love affair turn into a positive relationship. Trump and Kim can't just elope. They have to bring their governments with them and bring the families together, basically, in order to make this a positive outcome.
Mm-hmm. Wouldn't this top-down diplomacy, doesn't it give a momentum to the working level officials and give them room to work on?
Yes, and we haven't yet said that one of the most positive things that have come out of this top-down process is that North Korea is no longer testing. It's been more than a year since they've tested a nuclear device or a long-range missile, and that creates a positive atmosphere in which we can try to move forward on the on concrete steps that will assure that this peaceful atmosphere continues into the future.
Mm-hmm. So if North Korea brings Yongbyon to discuss, would that be considered tangible?
I think that it could be a tangible first step, and I think that's really the flexibility that the administration has shown so far, is the willingness to maybe start by eating a slice of this pie by working on Yongbyon, but at the same time, Special Representative Began and John Bolton have been very clear that our ultimate goal is going to be to see a final, fully verified denuclearization that includes removal of the program.
So you were directly involved in the talks in the past. Do you agree that the Trump administration now currently has a very unique opportunity to solve this problem once and for all?
Yes. Again, I share the intelligence estimate that the North Koreans are are most unlikely to give up their nuclear weapons programs. But I think we have the best opportunity we've ever had to try to bring about a change. There's a new leader in North Korea with a different way of operating. There's a new leader in South Korea with an openness to engaging with North Korea. And we have President Trump, who's willing to take a chance and see if this top-down process can bring about the right result. I think the problem, the main issue after Singapore is that President Trump really did not tie down the process and didn't tie down even some of the definitions, the definition of what denuclearization is. He got a lot of words, but very little concrete result. And as Scott said, I think this time it's important that something concrete come out of it. And I very much believe that process has to be key. But I go back to the fact that North Koreans are not testing. I think that is a central factor that allows all of this to go on.
Well, on that note, we'll end our conversation here and watch video for our next discussion. Negotiations on cost sharing for U.S. forces in South Korea are at a deadlock. The 5-year special measures agreement expired at the end of last year, and the deadline for the negotiations is set at mid-April. Ambassador, North Korea, through its official media, already criticized Washington for requesting Seoul to pay more and to share more burden. And do you expect North Korea to seek to drive a wedge between Seoul and Washington over this issue?
Well, I think the North Koreans probably see this and our failure so far to agree on cost sharing as a windfall. It helps their effort to drive a wedge between the U.S. and South Korea, and it embarrasses South Korea that they're being pushed around by Americans, and so it's an unfortunate time for this impasse to occur.
Mm-hmm. And Mr. Snyder, do you expect the current impasse in the negotiations could impact the denuclearization talks?
Well, I thought Special Representative Began was interesting yesterday, where he explicitly indicated that he perceived the cost-sharing issue as a separate issue from the denuclearization issue. And that was an important thing for, I think, us to hear. But of course, people are still wondering in Trump's mind whether they could be linked in some way. But the main point really is that this is a normal issue that we face in the alliance on a regular basis. It's about figuring out the valuation of the respective contributions. And frankly, it is an issue that I think that the governments should be able to resolve separate from the denuclearization issue. And it may take Trump and Moon to resolve it at this point, but I think that it is now just a matter of price, and they should be able to agree on a price.
Mm-hmm. Some people actually do worry, as Mr. Snyder said, that this could be linked to the possible drawdown of U.S. troops in South Korea. How do you see it? Could that be linked?
Well, I think there are a lot of things going on in President Trump's mind as he views this issue in South Korea. He is pressing all of our allies to pay more, pressing NATO, pressing Japan, pressing South Korea to pay more to share the cost of our defense. The president also would like to reduce the number of U.S. forces stationed abroad. He sees that an expense. He sees exercises as an expense, and so he's trying to do that as a separate issue vis-a-vis our ally, the ROK. The I think he has it separately in his mind from the North Korean effort, although it did come up in Singapore and may well come up in future talks. But I think in South Korean minds, South Koreans, many South Koreans, I think, are worried that Trump may, in negotiations with North Korea, agree to do too much that might harm our alliance. That is, reduce forces, reduce exercises, and that's being kind of caught up in the other exercise that of getting our allies around the world to pay more, and this is unfortunate timing.
One additional factor that I think is important to consider here is that the impasse over burden sharing has also, and the concerns that Trump might trade away the troop presence for some kind of denuclearization, is that it's induced pushback in Congress. And so we see legislation, I think, from Senator Cory Gardner and some other expressions of trying to reiterate conditions for a U.S. military withdrawal from Capitol Hill. And so that's an important signal to the president that there is a limit to how far the Congress is going to be willing to go on that.
Mm-hmm. More fundamentally, some experts point out the fissure between the two sides is not because of the cost sharing, but because of the perspectives over the common enemy, North Korea, the different perspectives between Seoul and Washington. What do you think?
I don't see that. I think the issues are separate, and certainly I believe in President Trump's view. The cost reduction point is very important, and it's happening around the world.
So, Scott, how can the two sides best conclude the special measures agreement?
Well, I personally think the best way to conclude that agreement is for President Trump and President Moon to settle the issue as part of preparations for President Trump's meeting with Kim Jong-un. It's inevitable that they should talk or probably meet in advance of that summit, and I think that provides an excellent occasion upon which to settle this, basically what will be a side issue in the context of focusing on the Trump-Kim summit.
I mean, I think the fact that Steve Biegun included that issue in his speech that was really part of the North Korea process is a sign that we're going to try to fix it.
Mm-hmm. Well, on that note, we'll leave our discussion here and move on to our next segment. Now time for the photo moment, time to look at an interesting North Korea picture. Today we have a picture of a North Korean art troupe performance in Beijing. Chinese President Xi Jinping and North Korea's Vice Chairman of the Workers' Party Central Committee, Lee Soo-yong, along with North Korean performers, are in this group picture. The event was part of celebrations marking the 70th anniversary of the two countries' diplomatic ties this year. Scott, what's your reaction?
Well, this performance was originally planned for December 2015. So one reaction is, it finally is here. They are sending the signal that the China and North Korea relationship has been normalized. And of course, it's important that Xi Jinping is a part of this and blessing it. But really, in a way, this orchestral performance, it provides window dressing, but I think there's still a lot of problems in that relationship.
I'm struck in looking at it and thinking about it is that we've been talking here now for more than 20 minutes, and none of us has mentioned China. If we'd had this discussion a year ago, we would be talking a lot about China's role in North Korean denuclearization, how they can operate. I think it's both a sign that, in a way, that China has recognized the importance of reaching out to Korea, both Koreas, as a part of its own approach to the region. China wants to be more involved.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's all the time we have for this week. Mr. Snyder, Ambassador Hubbard, thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. And this was Washington Talk from the Voice of America, and I'm Eun-jung Cho. Join us next week for more analysis on North Korea.